Okay, now what I like to usually do too is I like to go in and I want to create some styles that will apply to the layout that I'm creating. Now remember, let me open this up in Firefox so we can see what the template looks like. It just goes in, just has simple text, simple links, and a couple paragraphs of text. Nothing major on this part. But really, when I'm looking at this, I like to add the external style sheet now so it can control the width and height of each of the sections. Now, you're not going to do that until if you're taking my class for fundamentals of 132. You won't be doing that till week 4 of the class. But I encourage you to do it early because it makes it easier to work with the content. So all we're saying here is, hey, let's set up the width and heights of all of our div sections so that way we can actually have a little bit more control on that part. Now the first thing you have to do is you're going to have to go to your wireframe and you're going to have to decide what the width and heights are going to be. Now currently I like to use I usually follow a website with a width of 960 pixels. So with that in mind, now you can do something a little bit larger. Now there's a couple different type of styles out there that you can follow. 960 grid is an excellent style to go in and create a website based on. If you do a search on 960 grid, you'll find some excellent information on that. But you know, 960 is a good size, but some people do 1024, even go up a little bit higher. But what you have to do is you basically have to measure out what each section is going to be, what size. So in this case, you can see the header up here is going to be 960 by 150 pixels in height. Then we have navigation, and what gets trickier is when you have things side by side. Okay, so I have the main content area and I have this column over here. So notice that the height is up here for column 1 is set to 400 and the height for column 2 is set to 400, so it matches. Now look at the width, 240 plus 720. If you add that together, what do you get? 960. So you have to put it side by side. Now when we start working, and I'll be talking more about padding, margins, and borders, that's going to affect your layout, and so you're going to have to make some slight adjustments to those widths if you add borders, padding, or margin. But right now, what we want to do is we want to make sure that anything that's side by side is going to equal 960, or whatever you decide what the page width is going to be. Now in this first column, I have two sections that are going to be on top of each other. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have the width for both of those sections be 240, but notice the height changes. The first height is going to be 290 and the second one's 110, but if you add that together, you get 400 pixels. And then lastly, we have our footer section. So we really have to plan that out. It's really an important aspect of web design is to plan out your sections, what width and heights are you going to be using. So think about that and come up with some plan on the width and heights for your website. Now with that in mind, then what we want to do here is I want to take this existing page I've created and I'm going to create an external style sheet to save my styles in. Now what I want to do here is I'm going to create a new document and I'm going to do a file, save as. You can name it anything you want, but you want to make sure you put it in the folder of where your template or the wireframe you're working with. I want to create a new folder here and I want to name it CSS. And so in that folder I'm going to open it up and I'm going to go in and change I'm using Notepad++. If you use another program, they're usually a save as type. You can choose cascading style sheets. And when you name a style sheet, again remember no spaces, keep it lowercase. I'm going to just name it simply style. You can name it anything you want. You might want to say style underscore the name of the website, things like that. That's up to you. And I'm going to click on save. Now for this to work properly, what we're going to do is we're going to have a link on our template page that will link to our external style sheet. This external style sheet that we have here is going to be applied to every page within your website. So over here, what I have to do in my head section, I have to add the style tag or the external style sheet link. And to do that, we use the link tag. This goes right in the head section. Okay, so with the link tag, we have it has three attributes that you have to type in. So we type in length, space, then we type in href equals, and then we have to put in the name of the style sheet. Now, since I saved it in a CSS folder, I have to tell it to look in the CSS folder, and we do that by putting in CSS slash, and then follows the name of the CSS sheet. And again, this is all going to be in quotation marks. So you have to type in the image folder or the CSS folder followed by the style sheet name. Then we're going to tell it that it is a style sheet by typing rel equals style sheet in quotation marks, one word, and then I'm going to say type equals quotation mark text slash CSS. This helps indicate that we are linking to a style sheet. So this needs to be added into all your head sections of your pages for the external style sheet to apply the same format to all your pages. So I'm going to go ahead and save that real quick. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in and I'm going to move this to another view. So I just right click on it if I'm using Notepad++. If you're using a different program, there should be techniques that will allow you to see things side by side. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and add some styles here at the top of my style sheet. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this simple default character set. So it helps us to go in, we just say at character set UTF-8. And what that basically does is just helps us to, when we start adding special characters, symbols into our page, it knows how to interpret it. So after that, what we're going to do is we start typing in our styles. Now, I've indicated that our page is going to be 960 pixels. So that means the wrapper is what's going to control that. Now, we name our wrapper by using the ID attribute. So when we go in and we indicate that we want to apply a style to the ID, we have to start off with a hashtag followed by the name of the ID that you incorporated in. So I say hashtag wrapper, and then what I do here, I'm going to put a curly brace in. The curly brace is going to indicate where the style rules are going to go in. I'm going to put a closing curly brace in at the end. So it's always important to put those curly braces in. If you don't, then you can cause some styles not to be applied. So what I'm going to do here to control the width of the section of the page, I'm just going to type in the word width colon 960px. Now, also what I'm going to do to help me center my page within the browser, I'm going to automatically add two commands that applies the margin settings to the wrapper. It's going to force equal spacing on the left side and right side of the wrapper, thus centering it if there's any room. And to do so, we just type in margin hyphen left, and we'll just say colon auto semicolon. And I'm going to do margin hyphen right colon auto as well. So that's going to put spacing in between. Now I want you to notice the style rules that we've added so far. Notice we type in the property name first, which in this case would be width. We always have it separating the width and the value by a colon. Then we type in the value, and it's always important to put the semicolon at the end to close off that style rule. If you don't, if I leave this blank, then this margin left will not work. So it's important to put the semicolons at the end of the property name and value pair. So the property name is always going to go first. And that's important to remember when you're working with styles. So the first thing we have to do is we have to indicate what we're applying a style to. Now since we're applying to the div tag with the ID name wrapper, we have to start off with a hashtag followed by the name. Then we can list out the styles. So the other thing about this is once we set this up, and if we have that link tag added to all their other pages, then this information is going to be applied to the same area. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one for the header. So I'm going to type in pound header, put in my curly braces, and then I'm going to simply put in width colon 960 px. Now height is just simply height colon, and I'm going to say 150 px here. And what I like to do here is I like to use background color. So if you've figured out what colors you're using for your website, then start implementing it into that section. Now, if you want, I like to add a color so I can see the sections separated. You can always change that down the road. So when we move into week 3 and week 4, you can change that. But I like to put in default colors so I can actually see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what we call the background hyphen color style. And basically what this does here is that you tell it what background color you're going to be working with, and in this case you tell it the hexadecimal value, and this is going to be a green value. Now, we don't type in the word green. We usually use hexadecimal, or we'll use the RGB model, because when the browser looks at your color, if you say red, it has to interpret what red is, and there's many shades of red. When you use hexadecimal values, it's specifically identifying that color for you. And we talk about that. I'll have that talked about in other videos and other topics for that purpose. I'm going to save this right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to view this template. I like to see things as I'm working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch this, and notice how the green comes up. And notice how the page is centered. This is centered because there's equal space on the left side, equal space on the right side because of the margin left and margin auto, or margin left and margin right that we applied. So just adding some color really helps. Now, you don't have to keep this color here. You can change it to the color scheme if you're not sure what your color scheme is going to go to. But notice the width and height added. It really helps with your layout. Now, you'll spend more time specializing and formatting the text in the content with styles, but getting the section set up is really important. Okay, so let's add another one for my nav section. So here I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have the width and height. I'm going to have a background color added. So pound nav. Now again, I like to see what's going on here, so I'm going to save my style sheet, and I'm going to open up my browser. I'm just going to do a reload, and you can see that it has a gray background. So again, now I'm going to go in. I have my main section that I'm working with. I got my main section that's going to have the 2 columns. So the main section is grouping the 2 columns together. And what I want to do here is I want its width to be 960 and its height to be 400. Okay, so its width and height, it's going to match that whole section of our page. So if we look at it in Photoshop, or I use Photoshop to create my measurements, so you don't have to use that. You can use anything you want. But if we take the look at the main section and we add 240 plus 720, that's 960 by 400. So we're incorporating that. Now we have to have, once we get that in, we can set up the individual columns. Okay. So right now, if I save this and I refresh my browser, there's just a light gray color going on right there. Okay. Now we have column 1 and column 2 that we're going to add styles to. Now remember, as we're working with this, column 1 was going to be a certain size that we're going to work with, and it's going to be 240 by 400. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, for column 1, I'm going to add a width and height of being 240, height as 400. I'm going to add a little background color here. I'm going to change that a little bit later. And I'm going to also add width and height and have background color white here so we can see it. Now when I save this and I look at it, when I go in and I see this, I don't see my text over here in this right area where the gray is. So the problem is that when you have things side by side, you have to apply a float style rule. The float allows you to put things side by side when you have a layout. And it's a simple command. You have two couple options here. You have float left and you have a float right that you can apply. But anytime you have things side by side, we just use the float colon left, and it's really easy to work with. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my style sheet, and I'm going to add a simple float colon left semicolon. And I'm going to just copy and paste this down. Now I'm going to have float left added for column 1 and column 2. Column 1 and column 2. So now if I save this, and now if I view my page, and let me reload real quick. So now the text is now lined up here and has a white background. And you have your content over here. Now we don't have any content added into this area, so you don't see it. Now if I want to, if I just want to add a little extra text here, I can add something in my sub 1 area so you can see it. So here's the text over here as a paragraph, and so this section is fitting exactly what we want, and over here it's fitting exactly what we want over here on the right. So again, all we did here was in our style sheet, I added float left to this, to both columns that you have side by side. If you have a 3-column format, column 1 is going to be float left, column 2 float left, column 3 float left. Now there's different ways to work with floats. You'll learn more about floats in the upcoming weeks in our class, but it's something to take a look at and to get a better understanding of, because it's an important way when we start working with images and we start working with our layout, we want to use floats on that part. Okay, so I got that done. Now one last thing I'm going to do is I want to apply a footer style for the bottom, and I'm going to fill it with the background color of what we use for the header, kind of create some symmetrical look to this. So now when I do a reload here, and I click on refresh, see how, or actually I'm using, I believe, the nav section color there. So you can see here that's using, it's coming down here at the bottom. I'm getting this to lay out the way I want. Now what I want to do, because I have something a little more, I got on my main div tags all set up width and height. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to control the 2 sub categories I created that I want over here on the left hand. I'm going to delete that paragraph I just added. So what I want to concern myself is these 2 sections I have over here on the left and right side. The one at the bottom, one at the top. Okay. So since it's in column 1, I'm going to just put it right up here after column 1. And again, because it's named with an ID, it's great because all you have to do is pound sub 1 and then your curly braces on that part. Now what we have here is we want the width and height to match exactly to what we indicated, 240 by 290. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just going in and adding a little background color. I'm going to use a little lighter muted gray, or green, more green. I'm going to do the same thing for pound sub 2. The key here is the height. Oops, let me get here. Height 110 and 290 will equal up to 400. The width is going to match exactly to the main column width. Main column width should match exactly, but the height is going to be different because it has to measure up to 400. See, I like to put these 2 styles together because they fit within the column itself. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's look at this real quick. Reload. You can see that I have my red up here showing, my green showing down here. It's a little darker green, kind of fits within the scheme that we're working with. But notice how, look what's happening here with our footer. Notice how this is this area down here is going on top of our footer. That's because that's the way floats have a little quirks to it. So what we have to do here is we want the footer to ignore the floats right above it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our footer section and we're going to add a simple style called clear colon both. Now when you do that, it's going to basically ignore the footer above. Oops, I need to make one more adjustment. I forgot to save, so I'm going to resave. And notice how the footer now is matching exactly at the bottom. So what the clear both, and you'll learn more about this as you start reading in other weeks, clear both just ignores the floats and it moves the footer down below them on that part. Okay? So again, I like to set up the widths and heights accordingly because it really makes my life easier when I start adding content down in the other weeks. I've already have some content here added. Okay, I definitely have some content here added. But the key here is when I start making some other changes, if it's already set up as my page layout, it makes your life a lot easier. Now, the other thing too, if you start working with this and you have other pages already created, remember, if I open up the About page and I run this real quick, it's not going to look any different from what we saw earlier. Why is that? That's because that page is missing the link tag. As soon as I add the link tag to this, to the head section, and I run it, it's going to look identical to what we have in our home page. And then what's going to happen is on this About page, you'll be changing the content to fit the information that we have there. So that's what I would do is, again, it's giving you a little head start on based on what you have to do in the upcoming weeks. But I like to set up my widths and heights accordingly right now once I set up my div tags. Once I set my div tags, it's easier to work with that. So that's something to follow. You don't have to do the width and heights until like week 4 if you're in my classes. In general, just something to keep for those who are viewing this video that are not in my classes. Just in general, something to keep in the back of your mind that you want to follow.